The Quebec Drama Federation presents a roundtable discussion with 6 of the well over 24 artists involved with Imago Theatre's upcoming festival, Her Side of the Story, Revision to Resist. The festival runs from October 31st to November 5th at the Centaur Theatre. The festival will feature 4 iconic histories, stories, and myths revised to center the female experience and reclaim her side of the story. Well, welcome to the QDF office. You're the biggest group we've had come visit us so far, so thank you for trekking on all the way down. If you want to just start, we'll start on this end and introduce yourselves and how you're involved with the festival.
Okay, so I'm Tamara Brown, and I'm directing The Last Wife, written by Kate Hennig, and I'm also playing Hester in Fucking A, directed by Sophie G.
I'm Oliver Koomsatira, and I'm playing Monster in Scribe. Monster is Hester's son in Fucking A. Yeah.
I'm Gabriel Maharjan. I'm playing Eddie in The Last Wife, who is King Henry's son in the play and in real life.
Right.
I'm Jen Viens, and I am playing Nora in What Happened After Nora Left Her Husband, which is a translation originally written by Frida Jelinek.
I'm Kathleen Stavert, and I'm playing Mary in The Last Wife, and Mary is King Henry's daughter and his Eddie's son, directed by Tamara.
Eddie's sister.
Eddie's sister.
Yeah.
Not Eddie's son.
His monarchy is super incestuous.
Am I a woman? Am I a...
Amazing, transcendent, baby.
Yeah.
And I'm Jen Quinn, and I am directing the Penelopiad.
Great. I have to say that's I love Margaret Atwood, and I saw like a really excellent. I used to be a substitute teacher. I saw a really excellent high school production of it. I couldn't believe that they did this in high school, this play, and they had a tub, and had these amazing fabrics, and it's just a wonderful, like a really great show. Maybe you guys want to talk a little bit about the pieces that you're working on, and just some thoughts on working on these different shows. Who wants to start?
Well, one thing that I found really interesting, I really like history, and so I've always, doing a play that is based on history is something that I really enjoy doing the research of. But Catherine Parr was someone that I'd never heard of in history before, and I knew that King Henry had a lot of wives. I think everyone knows that, and that whole part of it. But she was someone who was really so influential in the history of the monarchy and how things came to be afterwards. Like Mary the First would have never been queen, Elizabeth would have never been queen. It was really, there's a lot of history that was just never talked about, but it's really interesting and important history, I think.
I think I love how all of these plays, and I'm really going to, mainly for Henry because I don't know all of the other plays extensively, but I just love how Imago has taken these plays and just posed the sort of the what if, like what if this was told from a different point of view, and a point of view that we're not necessarily used to seeing. And I think that that's like, and in the choices that I feel like I'll be making and that I've been making in studying the text is that little like, what if to every side? There's always a different side of the story. When there's 2 parties involved or more, there's always another side. Right. And I love that how all of these plays are posing that.
It's fascinating, because, I mean, when I'm speaking about a play like The Last Wife, which, has roots in history and facts, I guess, that are measurable, things that we know to be true. What's fascinating is you can look at events, but depending on your vantage point, the vista that you see is so very different. And it's an interesting thing when you have a collection of facts, of things that you know to be true in history or in storytelling, whatever those signposts are, depending on where you stand, your point of view and what becomes true and truth can be vastly different. And so what Imago is doing is so valuable. It's such a great way to shake up the paradigm of storytelling and theater, the way that we understand it and the way that the industry is right now, you know, just by virtue of revisiting stories or facts or things that are more or less a part of the zeitgeist, things that we know to be true or that we're very familiar with, and the idea of, well, so from the text, what if you stood here, we think about Henry and all of his wives, but we don't think about what history looked like from the vantage point of each of his wives. Or we can look at Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter and take an outside view of Hester, but what happens when you center that character? What does the world look like from her perspective? Same thing with
the Penelopiad.
with the
Yeah,
Penelopiad,
so
right?
Odysseus was gone for 20 years, and she upheld the kingdom, and that is just kind of touched upon in terms of serving Odysseus's story
Correct.
instead of actually addressing Penelope's story.
And there's so much that you can see by doing that. And, you know, there's the text, who's writing the text and who's imagining what exists in those spaces that we don't look at. But it's also great that, you know, in an industry where women, there are not as many women who are directing and who are leading and who are framing storytelling and the conventions. It's great to have this space to explore in a lab what turns us on about storytelling. What would we explore? How would we tell stories if given the space and the latitude to do so, to not have to follow the same paths that everybody else does, but to say, well, if I told this story, what would I do? It's a great opportunity. So we'll see how it lands, right?
But I think it's also really important in some ways, because I think when we learn history, you know, in school and throughout life, we're always taught it as almost as a science or some sort of, you know, this is the way it was, and this is the, you know, it's almost like a singular truth to it. But it's really just it's so much more like an effort in the humanities onto how, you know, it's a lot more about storytelling and perspective than a lot of people give history credit for. People just look at history and they're like, well, this is how it happened, this is fact A, fact B, fact C, and order of events, but there's a lot more human than that.
And it always comes with a bias. And
Yeah,
here we're shifting that bias
Exactly.
to somewhere else. So.
Yeah, I think the inclusion of the word in the motto of like revise is really a brave choice when you're doing shows that are based on history, because if you're a historian, you would never want to be labeled revisionist, right? Because that means you're taking, you know, it's an obvious step out from what is the accepted narrative of these historical stories. But to just boldly say like, yeah, we're revising it because all history is revisionist history in a way. Like I think that's a really bold choice to include that word in the tagline, and I think
it is a part of the resistance, truly.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's been said, history is written by the victors. And the people who are silenced, the people who are vanquished, as it were, do have a perspective and a point of view of events that happen, and, you know, however we string those together to be a story, there are narratives that are not looked at, and for a very specific reason. So there's something quite subversive and wonderfully rebellious and necessary in terms of what Imago does, because I think as a country, as a culture, as a society, it does us no end of good to shake up the way we look at ourselves and the way we define ourselves, and to question, and to question what we believe to be true about ourselves. And if we can do that with these stories that are familiar and that are canon, how much more can we gain insight into what's really going on around us?
And that's the beauty of it, because it's a play festival, and so there's a lot of artistic license. And the beautiful thing about storytelling and plays is that there's so much to, like, you can turn over so many rocks and you can fill in your own spaces, because it's accepted that some of the stories within the stories can be invented or reimagined or colored in a way that the playwright chooses to, or the creators choose to kind of flesh it all out. So, for example, for this, you know, the story of the last wife, there may be, you know, there's some scenes in the chamber that probably didn't happen, or conversations that didn't happen, but the beauty of it is that it's a play, and it's a story, and it's a reimagining and a creation that you can flesh out. And having a festival like this gives it that sort of gives us the license to play that and to mold it.
The reality of that too is that in any sort of history there are so many blanks. You know, we are only told the things that we know for sure. And I think the only way to imagine these stories with that human perspective is to, you know, go ahead and say, well, how, you know, as we understand humanity and as the playwrights understand humanity, what makes sense? How are these people not just fact figures in textbooks, but how are they also people that lived or could have lived for the fictional stories?
Yeah, in terms of history, you know, it always seems like it's very finite. Like this is A, B, C, D, E, and this is how it ended, and there you go, and then that's the end. We moved on to something else. And it's interesting because, like in the case of what happened after Nora left her husband, it's a chance to observe what happened to Nora after she left at the end of A Doll's House. Because you read the play and then it comes to this ending and it's like, oh, she asserted her dominance or her individuality, and she made a choice to go against the grain and leave her husband, which was unheard of at that time. And then everybody kind of reads the play and they go, wow, that's so amazing, but what happened to Nora after she left, right? They just kind of leave it there and they go, that was nice. But then with this version that Jelinek has imagined, you kind of get to examine, okay, so she made this choice, but was it all positive really in the end? You know, because she goes through a lot of different scenarios and you kind of see how her life unfolds, and in a way she kind of comes full circle. So it's really interesting to think, okay, there's more beyond the end of the history book, or when you come to the end of the paragraph, which is really interesting.
Not the show, but the festival has a really specific sort of vision that we've been talking about. How does that affect your acting process, if at all?
I'll jump in. I don't want to take too much just because it's a women's festival and you know, I felt awkward coming on board. I did speak to Sophie about it and I was like, you sure I should come? You know. So I've always worked with very strong women throughout my career. I think that maybe because there isn't as much space as we're realizing that women can, like the play that I'm in, Fucking A, is written by a black woman, directed by an Asian woman. So it's two very underrepresented people in our society, especially in the media and theater as well. And main character played by a black woman. So for me, I love to get different perspectives because, okay, I'm going to be careful. I work for and audition for a lot of white people, which isn't wrong, but it's a different perspective. So as an actor, I'm fed differently when I work for different types of people, women and men, and different genders that we can you know, imagine. So as an actor, it feels like it's giving me opportunities to see things different in my own process. So that's kind of like a learning process as well, to be open to something that you wouldn't usually be open to. Yeah.
I find that for my character, because there's so much history on the monarchy out there, like the Netflix, YouTube, you can find so many videos and so much writing on the internet. I constantly go through it and it keeps coming back that what is being discussed in the play, Catherine, she's barely ever mentioned in the history of Eddie or really the history of the family at all. And so I get a lot of interesting facts out of doing the research and a lot of interesting insights, looking at the stuff that Edward wrote when he was king and a young king. It's really interesting, but I keep coming back to that realization that this history, that this research that I'm doing is still based on a certain perspective, and that my job as an actor is not to is beyond doing that research, but also looking at how that single perspective really just deprives the humanity out of the character, and to understand that I'm playing a child between the ages of 6 and 9, and there's so much stuff that happens to a 6 and 9-year-old, especially when it comes in reference to his parents, his father, his stepmother, and his sisters. And so although history really looks over a lot of those influences and really looks at how he was raised to be a king and how he acted as a king and all the military accomplishments, there's a lot more stuff that I get to play around with, and I think we all get to play around with in rehearsing this, in trying to see how these people were human.
For me, the great thing is, because of the mandate or the mission of the festival, or the wording that we're using, there's a freedom being a woman, being a female actor. It's kind of like I don't want to say being granted permission to go, but that's kind of how it feels, like to be in a room and to be examining these works, or to be examining Nora and seeing it and being encouraged to see it from the female perspective, like the other perspective, because I find that as a woman, a lot of times you're worried that it's going to be, is this too political? Am I being too feminist with this? Am I outside of the box too much that it'll make people uncomfortable? But in this case, it's like that's what we're all being encouraged to do. So there's a real freedom in that. That's kind of exciting and a little bit scary, but in a really, really good way.
Anyone else want to talk about just the energies in the room and how, what does it mean to be working on this show, how the process is going?
It's a very different, it's an interesting bifurcation of experience that I'm having in this festival. What it means to act as a director and to be able to withdraw and really, is it a detachment? To some extent, there's a detachment in demanding of myself that I have a very global and very open point of view to accommodate a lot of different artists' input. It's a great joy and privilege and responsibility to be able to be at the helm of a story and the helm of a collective of artists contributing to mining what the truth of a story is and to determine together how we're going to make that expression happen. And it's very, very rewarding and rather demanding. And so before becoming a director, I worked primarily as an actor, and so being able to be an actor is very liberating for me in this process. It's really nice to have, like, what does Jane Austen call it, like that 2 little inches of ivory? I just have a really small brush stroke to see an entire universe in this one character and her relationships, which is quite liberating for me, which requires me to do the opposite of something that's detached and all-encompassing in a community way of thinking, and that becomes very subjective and very, very personal and requires me to, bring this body, this Black, Indigenous, Asian, all the intersections of identity that this body inhabits to this story, and then to find what is true and what really resonates. Like I was saying before, there's your whole life experience. It's like a Venn diagram. Your whole life experience is this one sphere, and then the character that the playwright creates is this other sphere, and where the two overlap, that's where you find the role. And so to be a part of Fucking A has been actually a very wonderful, liberating, and almost selfish experience for me to have so little responsibility for everybody else's journey, except to just be present and to try to tell the truth and to try to find out and just listen what's going on in the room. There's hardly any other time. There's hardly any time either. None of us are addressing the fact that we're doing these enormous stories in 24 hours. Maybe 20 hours for the actors, 24 for the directors, because we get 4 hours of tech to look at the empty space and try to create a container to drop the players back in. So I have my experience is bifurcated, but I am very fulfilled in both of those things. Like when one thing gets to be too much, I find solace in the other.
There's so many people in the Montreal English community that are a part of this, which is so great, so great. And it's such a condensed, like, tiny little amounts of time, but so many people involved, and that's so much fun. I mean, it's fun. It's really fun, and it'll also bring the community out, and that'll have ripples on, you know, like everyone's friend will bring a friend, and they'll bring a friend, you know. So there's such a large amount of people involved in this, and then it'll spread out.
Yeah, it's nice because there's about 35
I think
artists,
40 or
something like
Yeah.
that. Something in
Great
that range
community
of
building.
artists working on this, and so it's really nice because it is 20 hours of rehearsal, so it's 20 hours to play around in this laboratory of a play. And all of these people, it's almost like we're all getting a little workshop, but then that workshop we're also sharing it with the public. And so they also get to join in that conversation around what happens if we revert the perspective of these well-known stories.
It'd be great if it was an active, involved audience, right? I mean, we're getting at it so fast, like we're just it's all hands on deck, and it would be really, and it's such a collective community engagement. It'd be so great for audiences. I mean, whatever you think about what you're seeing up there, like in terms of having talk-back discussions after the exchange, I'm really intrigued to find out what that'll be. At least that we talk to each other. At least that we talk to each other when all is said and done. I'm really looking forward to what that's going to be.
Yeah, the conversations will be very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I also find like, because I'm working on one of the 4 plays, I'm just really enjoying going through all the research of it and really with the cast and with Tamara going through and making these decisions and having these discussions as to all these different things that we know. I mean, the play is written, it takes place in the 1500s, but it has a very, it's not stuck to that. It has a lot of contemporary aspects to it, and it feels very, very relevant. So I think, we have all of these ideas that we're bringing to the table, and just this morning I was looking at the schedule for the festival, and I was like, hey, when am I going to go see the other shows? Because I'm just so excited to I have this one show that I get to put it all into, but I just want to see what all the other the process is, because 20 hours is fast, but fast and intense, and it's, it's a lot of good, I don't know, it feels like a lot of churning is going on. It's
no time to second guess yourself. Just trust your feet and go.
Which are some of the best choices and the most instinctive ones.
I miss it. Yes.
We have like a hive, and we just have the best queen bees to run it.
Pretty awesome.
Great. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here together. Any last comments or thoughts before we close out?
It's pay what you decide, or you could book online for a set fee, I think. So that means it's open to a lot of people who maybe don't have the funds to go see theater, especially at Centaur.
Right.
But art is like the best expression of being human. It's fucked that it's a privileged thing. It's fucked that everybody doesn't get access to every expression of what it means to be human, to look at yourself, to look at the other. And I love this festival for thinking around, the current paradigms, what's possible to get funding for, what model of performance, what level are you willing to engage, how do we get you in with what is possible.
Yeah, that's the thing, it's not like a play, it's a play, but it's not performed as a conventional play, it's a reading, which asks the audience to use different parts of their brain a little bit more, which is so great.
In a way, I almost see I see this festival as almost being like some sort of conference, but I've never gone to a conference that I get excited for. Like this is exciting. I feel like obviously there's the stress of okay, we have a week and a bit to put it all together, but just to I'm just so excited to be there and to have the audience and all the different artists to just really be there and to ask those questions about how do we look at history and how does that change our perspective of ourselves today, because it's all so relevant, even if it's based a lot in the past. It's all really, really, really about how we live and treat each other, men, women, non-binary people. It's really a lot of questions about how we decide to tell our stories.
Softer place to land when you change the rules.
Well, thank you all very much for coming down and for your very thoughtful comments about this festival. I'm super excited about it. As I emailed Sophie and was like, do you need any promo?
Yes. Tell everybody.
So thank you, and thank you for being part of this interview roundtable
Thank you.
discussion.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again to our roundtable participants for the illuminating discussion, and best wishes on your upcoming shows. For a more detailed schedule and for box office and ticketing information, please visit centaurtheatre.com.